Hey, hello, hello, hello. It is Transformation Tuesday. This is DeAnne Joy here, and it's my fave day of the week. It is Transformation Tuesday. So, while folks are jumping on, I got a little delayed here because we are having some rad weather here. School was canceled today because it's cold as all get out. My dogs will barely go outside to pee. And so it's an unexpected day with the kiddo home, yet it is my favorite day of the week, Transformation Tuesday. So we're talking about some good stuff today. And while folks are jumping on, I'm going to go ahead and share this out to my personal page and to my group so that whoever wants to get in on the goods can get in on the goods. We've been talking, there's been a lot of conversation in my my Facebook group, which is called Choose Joy, and it's for women in midlife who are dealing with transitions and, you know, really wanting to live with more intention, live their purpose in life. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about is grief. And, you know, of course, when you get to midlife, whatever that is for you, of course, you don't get to, you know, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, without experiencing loss. And, you know, here's the thing. We're not just going to experience one loss in our lives. Like, it is a part of life. Grief and loss is a part of life. And so, so we're not only going to experience one. That's the reality. And so, so it's something that we've got to learn how to deal with. And, you know, in Western culture in particular, grief is not something that we're terribly comfortable talking about, right? It's not something that we're terribly comfortable with addressing, with dealing with. Death is not something we're comfortable talking about. So all too often, you know, we're kind of walking around in this daze of intense grief and pain and thinking that we're abnormal, thinking that somehow the process that we're going through is different than what everyone else goes through. And that's just simply because we don't talk about it, you know, and so it's difficult to normalize it if we don't talk about it, right? So, I'm going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it head on. If you jump on, those of you that are jumping on live, let me know where you are joining from. And if you are hopping on, catching the replay, please type in #replay and also let me know where you are watching from so that I can be sure to comment. I check out all of the comments and comment on them, and I like to engage with you guys. So, what I'm going to talk about today is 3 powerful ways to use tapping, or EFT, I'll explain what that is in a second, to transform the grief of a loss, whether it's 2 months old or 22 years old, because any of us that have experienced loss or grief, what we know is that it doesn't go away, right? The grief, we can transform it, we can transmute it, it can lessen over time, it becomes not as intense as in those first, you know, days, weeks, months, you know, even few years, but it never goes away, right? And so whether it's 2 months old or 22 years old, this is something that you can use. Now, if you don't know, and by the way, we are having funky weather and I have been having some connectivity issues, so I'm really hoping that we don't have breaks and stalling and disruption in the connection. If so, please give me a heads up and let me know so that I can refresh and come back in or try to do something to fix it. So here's what tapping is. For those of you that have never heard of tapping, I will actually post another video that I made specifically about teaching tapping and the process of tapping. But essentially what it is, it's called Emotional Freedom Techniques. It's kind of the mainstream name is called tapping. And basically what the technique is based on the same theory as acupuncture. which is that there are certain endpoints. We're made up of energy, right? So we all have energy meridians running through our body. And with acupuncture, they use little tiny needles and put them at the end points of these different energy meridians. And the needles free up that blocked energy. The blocked energy can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be spiritual. And so the theory is that it releases those blocks to allow the body to naturally heal itself. And so the tapping is based on the same theory as acupuncture in that we use the energy meridians. We tap on certain points. The great thing is, for those of us that don't like needles, we don't use needles in this technique. We use our fingertips. We tap on certain points, end points of those energy meridians on your face and body. And it combines psychology and it combines science, neuroscience that you don't necessarily need to know about. All you need to know is that it's a powerful technique that I have used personally. That's how I started teaching it to my clients, is I learned it first for myself many years ago. And I use it with clients for everything from, grief to trauma to anxiety, addiction, smoking cessation, eating, all kinds of things, shifting limiting beliefs, all kinds of things. So it is an extremely powerful technique. So I'm going to talk today specifically about how you can use that particular technique to transform grief, whether it's 2 months old or 22 years old. So let's talk about what grief is, right? Grief is, and I'm specifically, of course, we experience grief in all kinds of ways in our lives, right? Grief can come from the loss of a relationship, the breakup of a relationship. It can come from, making a geographic move, even leaving a job that, you're leaving for a better job. There can be a grief or a loss associated with that. In this situation, I'm specifically talking about grief related to the death of a loved one, the loss of a loved one through death. And, grief is that thing that it is the shock and the overwhelm to our system. It's the shock and trauma to our system of the reality of that loss. And of course, it comes in many phases because, when we, there are different layers of it. It's a very complex, layered process, grief is. There's the initial shock and trauma when you find out, when you get that phone call, or when someone knocks on your door, or when someone says, "Are you sitting down? I've got bad news for you. I need to tell you something," or "You need to come home right away," whatever it is. That initial shock, that trauma, that jolt to the body, and that, the stabbing knife in the heart kind of pain that just makes us double over. That's the initial trauma and the initial just literal shock to our system, right? And, grief can get re-triggered as we go through multiple, milestones, different milestones in life. That grief can get re-triggered, right? So, when you, let me share a couple of my own personal circumstances with you. So I lost my father when I was a teenager. I was actually 15 years old. My dad was 39 when he passed away, obviously very suddenly and tragically. That grief gets triggered at different points in my life. When I graduated from high school, when I graduated from college, when I, got married, when I, moved away from home for the first time, when I had my, first child, when I moved back home for the first time after 30 years. There are all kinds of ways that, those old memories get re-triggered. When another loss happens, that's a big way that sometimes old unresolved grief resurfaces for us, is in the form of another loss. And so what happens is when we don't resolve the first one, they become layered on top of one another, and the grief becomes that much more complex, right? Because now you're dealing with the current grief as well as dealing with a re-triggering of old griefs, if that makes sense, right? So I'm just looking at my Facebook page to make sure, one, that the connection is not disrupting, and two, to check for any comments or anything. So grief is, either sudden grief or the grief that is coming, and it is what it is. It feels deep, and it's terrible and sad and lonely and heartbreaking, right? And some good things can come out of it. It can bring, families closer together. It can give us a wake-up call in life to, really live life with more intention, to, live with purpose. But you can't tell someone that when they're in the middle of it, right? Because when you're in the eye of the storm, it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like any good is going to come out of this. It just feels like the world is over. It feels like my life has forever changed. And in fact, it has, So sometimes we try to fix ourselves, we try to get over it. And so, we do things like, avoid it, or get absorbed in our work, or do this project and get over it. And you know what? It's not fixable. It's a process. It's a layered process. And when we try to avoid dealing with the layers of that grief, what happens is it gets stuck in those layers, and we never really process it. And that's when it can continue to really affect us in all of our relationships and in our daily lives. So what we try to do is keep you from getting stuck in the layers of your grief. And that's where tapping can actually really come in and really be powerful. So, know that grief scares people. Sometimes people have the best of intentions. I think always people have the best of intentions. Yet, if you've ever dealt with grief, I'm guessing that you've dealt a time or two with people saying things that, perhaps are intended to be helpful, but are insensitive and hurtful, things like, oh, they're at peace now, or that's what was meant to happen, or, you'll be fine, you'll be okay, or it'll get better, give it time heals all wounds. Well, those are not things that are necessarily helpful. And so sometimes even just people with the best of intentions saying something that can re-trigger that is less than helpful, even though, they're trying to be helpful. And so again, that can be another layer to that whole grief process. So know that people can say insensitive things, and this is a process that you can use with that as well. But it's a shock. Grief is a shock. It's a trauma to the system. And that initial shock, that initial trauma can last anywhere from a week to several months, right? There's no process for going through grief. If there's one thing I want you to walk away from this training with today, it's that there is no right way to do grief. People have written books, but truly there is no handbook that is a one-size-fits-all for grief. There's no right way to do it. You do it the way that you do it, and the way that works for you. And what works for you isn't the same as what worked for someone else. So, don't presume to know what someone else's process is. Their process isn't the same as yours. And so energetically, everything changes when we experience a loss, a death. Our DNA, it's in our DNA. It changes us. It changes our entire makeup. Literally nothing will ever be the same again. And so, part of what we do sometimes is isolate ourselves and withdraw from people because people say insensitive things, because people don't know what to say, they're uncomfortable with it. And so we can start to feel isolated and disconnected at a time that we most need to feel connected and not isolated. And so it can be, really hard. So when I was 15 and my dad died, what I did in response to that as a 15-year-old that didn't have the frontal lobe development or the emotional development or maturity or really the support to know how to deal with it. And so what I did was I acted out. And I never really dealt with the intensity of that grief and loss when it happened, because I got so caught up with just acting out and trying to ignore it and not knowing how to deal with it. And so as you can imagine, years later, that loss, continued to resurface until I really dealt with it and resolved it. When my mother passed away when I was 42, again, very suddenly and tragically, I thought at that time that I had done a lot better with handling my grief. And here's the reality. What happened was And for those of you that don't know my story, I'll share just the 90-second version. My mother, 4.5 years ago, my mother took a fall down her basement stairs, tripped over the threshold of her home, and fell down the basement stairs onto a concrete floor. And she sustained massive head trauma, and ended up in a coma. And my siblings and I, were faced with some really difficult decisions, because the reality was that she was not going to recover in any meaningful way. And fortunately, my mother had her advance directives completed and had made her wishes very known in writing, and so it really relieved the burden from us. And so, you know, I was grateful for her having her advance directive. Nonetheless, was it tragically and horrifically painful? Absolutely. Right? And so I have a huge family in Wisconsin. I lived in Texas at the time, and I was the only one across the country. And, you know, I have tons of family. So when I got home, I have 4 siblings. My siblings were all there with me. My mom has, you know, 8 brothers and sisters. And, you know, I have multiple cousins and friends and family. And so I was surrounded by people for the 10 or 12 days that I was home. And also just taking care of, you know, stuff, you know, going through her things and taking care of arrangements and writing the eulogy and delivering the eulogy and, you know, all of those things. And so during the time that I was with family, I actually felt like I was doing okay. I was handling it okay. It wasn't until a couple of weeks after, when I returned home to Texas, and in those times when it's quiet and, you know, and you're alone and in the middle of the night, those are the times that can get to be the most intense, right? That was when I first started to experience the grief. And after that initial shock, of course I experienced it with the initial shock, but the intensity of that grief hit me when I got home, because I was there alone and I wasn't surrounded by all kinds of people, and everyone around me was going about their lives as though my world hadn't just been completely fucking shattered, you know? And so I just didn't know what to do with it. And it was profoundly painful. And it took a long time for me to deal with that pain. And one of the ways that I started dealing with it, and I want you to I'm sharing this with you because I want you to hear that this is normal. And one of the ways that I started dealing with it was I started drinking. And I'd had, you know, issues in the past with drinking, and so it was something that was fairly easy to start up again. And I also, you know, jumped into my work and sort of absorbed myself, you know, that way, and really didn't deal with it. And quite frankly, I drowned myself in alcohol for 1.5 years before I finally came out of that fog and realized that I was not grieving. I was just simply trying to cover up the grief. And, you know, that's one way that we deal with it. I started eating too. We can eat, we can, you know, absorb ourselves in work or in a project, or, you know, or drink or eat or start smoking again, or, you know, all kinds of things that we start to do just to deal with that initial shock and trauma. And what I'm here to tell you is those things are all normal. It is okay if those are things that you've fallen into when you've gone through a grief process, or you're going through the grief process. It's normal, right? When it goes on, those are things that you really want to get some help with, because obviously it's not resolving the grief. All you're doing is, you know, putting a Band-Aid on it that is going to, you know, rip off the scab at some point, and there it will be for you again. So those are just defense mechanisms. That's just the way that, you know, we defensively try to avoid it and blot out the pain. But that's when we need to get really back to dealing with the loss, because, you know, again, let's face it, we're not only going to face one death in our lifetimes. It is a part of life, and the reality is we'll experience many times. And so when we deal with the trauma and shock of grief and move through that grief process, then we can be better equipped to deal with it when it happens again, because undoubtedly it will. Right? So literally every cell in our body, every cell of our DNA is affected by grief, and there is no one right way to go about dealing with it. So So one of the ways that we can use tapping to transform grief and to deal with grief is to tap on the initial trauma and shock, right? And, you know, I'm sure that those of you that have lost someone can relate to this. That moment that you get the news, the moment that the phone rings in the middle of the night, right? Someone saying to you, I need to tell you something. I have something really horrible to tell you. Something bad has happened. You remember that, right? That becomes seared in your memory. And so that initial trauma, that initial shock of, you know, not being able to imagine that it's real, and, you know, walking out the door and going, shit, my life will never be the same, right? And you know what? It won't be the same. It won't. You can reorient around it, but it needs to be dealt with, and it doesn't just go away. And life won't be the same. It will be different, but it can move forward in a positive way. So here's what we can do with the initial shock and trauma. And that might be remembering the time that they were lost. You know, one of the things that I did initially when I got home from Texas, because I couldn't wrap my head around, you know, my mother, you know, suddenly not being there, was I went to the place where she fell. And you know, you could still see, you know, the aftermath of the fall. And I literally just curled up on a ball in the fetal position and lay there and just sobbed, this gut-wrenching sob, right? So it's those moments that are seared in our memories. You know, you may have that replaying in your mind, right? So so one of the things that we can do is tap on, you know, that initial shock and trauma. And, you know, one of the ways that we do that, and this is, I'm just going to walk you through, and I want you to just repeat after me. If you don't know tapping, I've never done it, trust me and just repeat after me. Do what I do and repeat after me. So on this karate chop point here, that meaty part of your hand, even though I'm still in shock, repeat after me. And say it out loud or say it in your mind. And I don't care if it was 20 years ago or 2 months ago. Even though I don't know if I'll ever get over it, I accept myself no matter where I am. There is no right way to do grief. There is no timeline for grief, right? So tap right here on the eyebrow, the corner of the eye. Even though I don't know if I'll ever get over it. On the side of the eye, this grief that is so intense and painful. Under the eye, I don't know when the pain will stop. Under the nose, or if it will ever stop. Under the chin, but it feels like absolute heartache. On the collarbone, like a knife has been stabbed in my heart. Under the arm, and for women, that's kind of right at your bra line. I know it's weird, but just trust me. This loss and this pain that I feel so intensely, I know that I'm okay anyway. The top of the head, I'm okay and I accept myself where I am. Because there is no timeline for grief. There is no right way to do grief. Good. Take a deep breath and let it out slowly through your mouth. Good. Good. So one of the things that you can initially tap on is that initial shock, you know, the memory of, you know, the phone call at 3 a.m. You know, maybe you react to phone calls every time the phone rings. You know, a cell phone call can trigger that memory. You can tap on that. Even though I get terrified by a cell phone when it's ringing, I accept myself where I am. Even though it feels like I'll always be triggered, I know that I'm okay. There's no timeline for grief. There is no right way to do it. I'm okay right where I am, even if I feel lost and alone and in pain, right? So that's one way that you can use it. Now, one of the things that I'm very clear about with grief, and, you know, I've worked with, my own grief and dealing with others' grief for, more than 25 years now. And one of the things that I know about grief is that it's complicated, and there can often be, very often, there is an element of grief, or of guilt that is involved with someone's passing. So, I, as I mentioned, had lived, across the country. Hey, Deb, thanks for jumping on. I'd lived across the country. And when my mother passed away, I had not been home to visit her in over a year. Because life was busy, because, we couldn't take the trip back, because whatever. I had a tremendous amount of grief about that for a long time. If there was conflict in a relationship that hadn't been dealt with, or, sometimes we'll think about, if only I hadn't said that, or about the last interaction that we had with someone, wishing that we were nicer, wishing that we had said something, or wishing we hadn't said something that you said 10 years ago, or, wishing that you'd been kinder last week, or that you'd visited sooner, like myself. If there's something that you said or didn't say, or maybe a disagreement that you have, or something that you wish that hadn't happened, those are often things that we tend to feel guilty about. And guilt is a cancer that will eat you from the inside out. And so one of the things that we can use tapping for is to deal with the guilt. So one of the things that we do, so I'm going to do kind of a general guilt tapping process, but you take whatever issue is of yours. And one of the things that we do to measure the progress is we measure it on a scale of 1 to 10. How high is the grief? 1 being not at all, 10 being the worst it could possibly be. So before you start, you measure it on a scale of 0 to 10 and just trust whatever number comes to mind first. And then we're going to measure it again after. So we're going to start here on the karate chop point again. Even if you don't know tapping, you've never done it before, just trust me. I know it looks weird and it feels weird. Just trust me and follow along. So tap on this karate chop point. Even though I feel guilty, and repeat after me. Even though I feel guilty, and now they're gone, I choose to accept myself anyway. Even though I feel this terrible guilt about this relationship, I accept who I am and that I did the best I could do. Even though I'm still carrying some guilt about this relationship, I don't think I did enough. I accept who I am anyway. Right? And then tap right here on the eyebrow. This guilt about this relationship. Again, just repeating after me and doing what I'm doing. Side of the eye, the guilt about what I said. Under the eye, the guilt about what I did. Under the nose, the guilt about what I didn't say. On the chin, the guilt about what I didn't do. On the collarbone, it's right here on this collarbone part, the hard part. The guilt about what I didn't, or this remaining guilt about that person. Under the arm, and again, women, that's just right where your bra line is, about 3 inches below the armpit. The guilt and grief. Karate chop point, sometimes they're overwhelming. Top of the head, and that's okay. And I'm okay. Close your eyes, take a deep breath. And hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4, and let it out slowly through your mouth. Good. And now once again, just with that one round, and you can keep going until you get it down to a 0, 1, or 2 until it's not bothering you. But go ahead and measure it again. Where is it now as you think about it? If it was at a 10 before, where is it now? Has it come down to an 8, to a 7? Has it come down to a 3? So, and again, that complication of, complicated relationships as relationships are, that's probably what bowls you over, right? Hey, Benjamin, thanks for jumping on. And so that's what can happen with people. We can't believe that it's happened, and you're waiting for them to walk in the door. You have these thoughts. You actually have these thoughts where you start to think, surely they're going to walk in the door right now. You know, when you have something exciting that you would share with that person, you think about, oh, I can just pick up the phone and call them, right? You can start to feel a little bit crazy, like, you know, not that you're having actual hallucinations. Thank you, my friend. Not that you're having actual hallucinations, but that you can start to feel like question your insanity and feel crazy. That's what happens. And so what we need at that time is we need support. We need love. We need people around us who knew them, who can handle our grief and who can handle us talking about them, right? And we need people who will say, hey, you look like you're having a tough day. Is there something you want to talk about? You know, one of the you know, again, we don't know what to say. One of the nicest things I think that you can say to someone that's grieving is just, you know, sometimes there are no words, and I'm really sorry for your pain, and I'm here for you, right? Because there really isn't anything that makes them feel any better. So on top of needing to be around people, again, that's a time you most want to isolate, the time that you most need to not be isolating. You need to be around people that love and care about you. And we also need to take care of ourselves. Sleep, rest, eating, even if you don't feel like it, at least getting nutrition in the form of a protein shake or bar or something like that if you need to, because your body cannot heal, mind, body, and spirit, without getting adequate rest and nutrition and sleep. Hey, Hunter, thanks for jumping on, my friend. So we need to take care of ourselves, and we can do some tapping around what I call props, right? Where grief will often resurface. Again, it's in those quiet moments when we're alone, oftentimes, that get to be the most difficult. And so we can actually do some tapping around props, like photographs, pictures that remind us of them, you know, clothes that we haven't done anything with, opening up the door to their room that we haven't gone into yet. Those are things that will trigger that grief. And you know what? That's a good thing. We have to actually go through the process, because when we don't, it gets stuck emotionally. There are layers to the grief, and if we don't deal with that initial layer of the shock and trauma of it, we can't get to the layers beneath that. So even when you don't know, I'm saying these fancy words and setup phrases and stuff while I'm tapping, you don't have to know that. That's the art of it. The cool thing about this process is it works even when you don't know what to say. It just works. Just trust me on that. It has an effect on your neurology, on your whole, every cell in your being, such that it will help to clear out those blocks. So you can just do some tapping on these points, right? Just while you're looking at a photograph or sitting in their room, looking at their belongings, and allow the grief to come up and just tap on it as it's coming up. Allow yourself to feel the gut-wrenching, you know, stab in the gut kind of pain that grief brings. Because that's what it is. That's the reality of grief, y'all. It doesn't go away when we don't deal with it. Deb says, I love me some tapping. I know, right? It's so freaking powerful. So when you get up in the morning and you're feeling lousy, and you know, you just do some tapping, not even knowing what to say, just do some tapping. That's the time when you're going to feel weepiest, right? Is early in the morning, late at night, when you're alone, it's quiet, and you're not distracted by the busyness of your day. That's the time you want to allow yourself to feel. It is okay. And it's also okay and normal when... I want you all to give me some hearts or some likes if you can relate to this. When you feel grief and you feel intense pain, Hunter says the only way out is through, and it's so true. When you feel intense pain, your body can shake and move in ways that you've never seen it do before. You can feel yourself cry a guttural, you know, visceral kind of cry that you never knew could come out of you, right? And that is it may feel incredibly odd, but crying through that healing is absolutely necessary. Tap, tap, taparoo from Happy Gilmore. That's awesome. So replaying the movie of that initial trauma, you know, not being able to get over, you know, hearing the screeching brakes of the car accident, or, seeing the car wreck, or seeing them take their last breath. Replaying all of that are things that you can tap on. Even though I can't get this movie out of my mind, I can't stop seeing it. I wish I could make it go away, but I'm okay where I am. This is what grief looks like. And the grief will get better. Right? It doesn't go away, but it can get better. And so just tap on it very gently. Just tap on it when you're hearing their last words, or that moment that they took their last breath. Just tap through it, right? So the third thing you can use tapping for to transmute grief is to deal with the profound sadness and the brokenheartedness, right? Anytime you lose someone, you feel like a piece of you is gone. And you feel brokenhearted. You literally feel like your heart is broken in half. That is real. That is grief. That is what it is. And so you can tap on that as well. So just go along with me. We'll tap on the grief, the profound sadness, and the heartbrokenness, right, of losing someone that we love. So on that karate chop point, even though it feels as if my heart broke when she died, repeat after me and do it with me. I accept who I am and how my body is responding. Even though it feels like I'm heartbroken and I am so fucking sad, I accept who I am and how I'm feeling. Even though I feel heartbroken now that they're gone, I accept who I am and how I feel. Right? The eyebrow, I hate this heartbroken feeling. Side of the eye, I know there are some really good memories under the eye, but I can't access them right now. Under the nose, my heart is broken. On the chin, my soul is devastated. On the collarbone, and that's okay. Under the arm, in time, I'll remember some of those good times. In time, I will remember the good things. On top of the head, and I'm okay right where I am, even in this intense sadness. Good. Take a breath and let it out slowly through your mouth. Good. So never pretend that your heart is not broken. Never pretend that your heart isn't broken, whether you lost someone you loved 2 months ago, 2 years ago, or 25 years ago. It is one of the most difficult things that we deal with in this life, and yet one of the most natural, right? And the reality is that it doesn't go away. Grief doesn't go away. It is a process that has layers that need to be dealt with. Does it get easier? Yeah, you won't always feel that intense, storm raging inside of you. One of my clients described it as feeling like I'm standing alone naked outside and there's a storm raging inside of me, right? When I was dealing with grief, I not only was drinking my way through it, but I was also, and constantly fighting with my spouse and yelling at my kid and, doing whatever I could to numb the pain. Those are all things that are a normal part of the grief process. And so know that wherever you are is okay. Know that it does get better, but that you have to move through it in order to get beyond it. It is not something that you can just pour yourself into something to try to abate the grief and the pain. You can't just get your way around it. You've got to go right through it. And that's where you need someone that can help you through that process if you're having a hard time going through it yourself. Now, let me just say this, because I am a therapist, as you may know. What is also not uncommon, again, I want to normalize this as much as possible for y'all, because I think one of the things that makes grief so hard is that we don't talk about it and we don't normalize it. And so we think that we're going through this process that no one else is going through, and we feel crazy. And the truth is, it is normal. So, know that that there was something I was just going to say, and it was really good, and I totally just lost my train of thought, but it'll come back to me. What I was going to say is, it is also not abnormal when you lose someone close to you to have thoughts of like, I just want this pain to go away, like I want to die, if only I just want to be with them again. Those are not uncommon feelings to have, and that's okay. Where it becomes a real concern is if you are feeling profoundly suicidal and you are feeling unsafe, that is a time that you need to get professional help. Okay, and I'm saying this as a licensed clinician that has dealt with grief and suicidality for many years. It is not something to mess with. Get professional help if you are feeling that way. Hunter says, only love is real. Amen, brother. It doesn't mean pain, injustice, hatred, anger, death, and violence aren't real, just that our judgment of these as bad or wrong is a misnomer. Grief is beautiful. It can be, absolutely, it can be beautiful. And what I want you to know also is that when you are going through that initial shock and trauma, and when you haven't resolved it, it doesn't feel beautiful. It feels anything but beautiful, and that is okay. That you can't see the gift yet in it, that is okay. So know that if you are dealing with intense pain around this, and you haven't been able to move through it, know that it's okay. Because if you were meant to go through this alone, you wouldn't be on planet Earth with 7.6 billion other people on the planet. So know that you're not meant to walk through it alone. If you want to learn more about how you can use tapping to cope with grief and to transform devastating grief, I want to invite you to schedule a 30-minute complimentary breakthrough coaching session with me where I can walk you through more of that and teach you the process of tapping. And like I said, I'll also post another video that specifically talks about tapping and kind of how to use it and so on. But it is powerful for moving through grief. And for those of you that have responded to my posts and my polls asking you about grief and loss, and sharing your stories, I want to say thank you for sharing. Thank you, Hunter, for sharing. I appreciate you, my brother. For those of you that have been sharing your stories, I want to say thank you. And you in particular, I want to invite you to take advantage of that complimentary coaching session because you don't need to be stuck in this, but you do need to move through the process, and I can help you with getting to the other side. Okay? All right, bottom line is, wherever you are, my friend, you are okay, and it is normal, and you can get some support and some help with walking through it. And know that I'm here for you, okay? I love you. If this message has resonated with you, thank you, Hunter, for sharing. Please share it out. There are so many people that need this message, so many people that don't talk about their grief because they think it's not okay and it's not normal because they're supposed to be at a different place than they are with it. And I'm telling you, they need to hear that wherever they are, it's okay, and that there are some tools and techniques that can really help them move through the pain of that. All right. Thank you guys for hopping on. I appreciate you with your patience with me coming on a little late. If you are in the midst of this winter storm like I am, stay safe, stay warm, and stay inside and stay off the roads if you don't need to be on them. Love y'all. Peace and blessings. Take care.